My stepsister looked me dead in the eye across the dinner table and said, "Dad loves me more anyway." Then she smirked like she'd just won the lottery. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just pulled out my phone, found the voicemail I'd been saving for months, and hit play. The color drained from her face so fast, I thought she might faint right into her mashed potatoes. Now let me tell you exactly how we got to that moment, because if I don't give you the full picture, you're going to think this is just another petty family drama. But this story goes so much deeper than sibling rivalry. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is about years of manipulation, lies, and a father who was so blind to his precious daughter's true nature that it nearly destroyed our entire family. My name is Jessica, and I've been dealing with my stepsister Riley for the past 8 years. 8 long, exhausting years of watching her play the perfect angel in front of our parents, while systematically making my life miserable behind closed doors. You see, when my mom married Riley's dad Tom, when I was 14 and she was 12, I actually thought I was getting the sister I'd always dreamed of. How naive was that? Riley was everything I wasn't. Blonde where I was brunette, petite where I was tall, bubbly where I was more reserved. She had this way of lighting up a room the moment she walked in, all dimples and sunshine. Everyone loved Riley immediately. Teachers, neighbors, family friends, they all fell for her charm within minutes of meeting her. And honestly, in the beginning so did I. I remember our first family dinner together at this little Italian restaurant downtown. Riley had insisted on sitting next to me, chattering away about school and her friends, asking me questions about high school like I was the coolest person she'd ever met. She even asked if we could share dessert, because she wanted to do everything together now that we're real sisters. I felt this warmth spread through my chest that I'd never experienced before. Finally, someone who wanted to be close to me. My mom had always worked long hours as a nurse, often pulling double shifts at the hospital, so it had mostly been just the two of us for years. Don't get me wrong, we were close, but there's something different about having a sibling, someone your own age to share secrets with and laugh with late into the night. I thought Riley would be that person for me. The first few months were actually wonderful. Riley would come to my room after dinner to do homework together, even though she was 2 grades behind me. She'd braid my hair while we watched movies, and she taught me this complicated friendship bracelet pattern she'd learned at summer camp. We'd stay up until midnight sometimes, just talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her mom, who had died in a car accident when Riley was only 7, and how scared she'd been that Tom would never find love again. She seemed so grateful that my mom had come into their lives, always gushing about how lucky we were to be a family now. She'd hug my mom extra tight and tell her she was the best stepmom in the world. My mom would get teary-eyed and say Riley was the daughter she'd always wanted to give me. It felt like we were all exactly where we were supposed to be. But looking back now, I realized that was all part of Riley's master plan. She was studying us, learning exactly what made us tick, figuring out our vulnerabilities so she could use them later. Because that sweet, grateful little girl, that was just an act. The real Riley was calculating, manipulative, and incredibly good at playing the victim whenever things didn't go her way. The first crack in the facade happened about 6 months after our parents got married. I had been saving up for months to buy tickets to see my favorite band Arctic Wolves when they came to town. I had a part-time job at the local bookstore, and every paycheck went straight into my concert fund. Riley knew how important this was to me because I talked about it constantly. I had their posters all over my room, their songs on repeat, and I'd been following their tour dates religiously. The tickets went on sale on a Friday morning, and I had everything planned out perfectly. I was going to buy them during my lunch break at school, but when I got to the computer lab and tried to purchase them, my debit card was declined. Confused and panicked, I called the bank, only to discover that someone had used my card to make a large online purchase the night before. $300, gone, spent at some makeup website I'd never heard of. I was devastated. By the time I got home and sorted out the fraud claim with the bank, the concert was completely sold out. I cried for hours that night, not just because I'd missed out on the concert, but because someone had violated my trust and stolen from me. My mom was furious and called the bank, immediately to file a report, while Tom tried to comfort me by saying, maybe we could find tickets on the resale market. Riley, of course, was the picture of sympathy. She brought me tissues and chocolate, and sat with me while I sobbed. She kept saying how awful it was that someone would do such a thing, and how she wished there was something she could do to make it better. She even offered to help me look for resale tickets online, staying up late with me scrolling through various websites and forums. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that I discovered the truth. I was looking for a hair tie in Riley's room when I spotted a pile of makeup products on her dresser that looked suspiciously high-end. Expensive foundation, luxury lipsticks, professional-grade brushes, the kind of stuff that costs a fortune. When I asked her about it, she got flustered and claimed she'd been saving up her allowance for months to buy it all. But Riley's allowance was only $20 a week, same as mine had been at her age. There was no way she could have afforded hundreds of dollars worth of premium cosmetics on her own. That's when the pieces started clicking together. The timing of the card fraud, her insistence on helping me search for tickets, her sudden interest in makeup tutorials on YouTube. I didn't confront her directly at first. Instead, I did some detective work. I checked the dates on the makeup website's shipping confirmation, which I found in her email when she carelessly left her laptop open. Everything had been ordered the same night my card was compromised. I also discovered she'd been screenshotting makeup tutorials and saving them to a folder labeled New Look, just days before the supposed fraud occurred. The evidence was overwhelming, but I still couldn't quite believe it. This was Riley, my sweet little stepsister who brought me soup when I was sick, and always remembered to save me the last cookie. How could she have stolen from me so coldly, then sat there comforting me while I cried about it? When I finally confronted her, she didn't even try to deny it. She just shrugged and said, "You make more money than me at your job, so I figured you could afford to replace it. Besides, you spend too much time on music anyway. Maybe this is a sign you should focus on more important things." I was speechless. Not only had she stolen from me, but she was actually trying to justify it by saying it was for my own good. She showed no remorse, no guilt, no recognition that what she'd done was wrong. If anything, she seemed annoyed that I'd figured it out. I told our parents immediately. My mom was horrified and wanted to ground Riley for months, make her pay back every penny with interest. But Tom, he had a different reaction. He sat Riley down for a heart-to-heart conversation, emerging an hour later, to tell us that she was just acting out because she was feeling insecure about money. According to him, she was worried that I had more advantages because I was older and could work, and she'd made a mistake in judgment, but had learned her lesson. A mistake in judgment, that's what he called calculated theft and emotional manipulation. Riley got a 2-week grounding and had to do extra chores to earn back the money, even though we all knew Tom would probably end up just giving her the cash himself, rather than making her actually work for it. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Within a week, Riley was back to her normal routine, and Tom had quietly paid my mom back for the stolen money. Riley never apologized to me directly. Instead, she just started acting like nothing had ever happened, expecting everything to go back to the way it was before. But something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. Every sweet gesture, every moment of apparent sisterly bonding, I found myself wondering what her real motive was. Was she genuinely being nice, or was she setting me up for her next manipulation? Unfortunately, I didn't have to wonder for very long. The credit card incident turned out to be just the beginning. Riley had apparently decided that if she could get away with stealing from me once, she could keep pushing boundaries to see what else she could get away with. Next, it was my clothes. I'd come home from school to find my favorite sweater missing, only to see Riley wearing it the next day. When I asked her about it, she'd claimed she thought it was hers, or that I'd said she could borrow it, or that she'd found it in the laundry room and assumed Mom had bought it for both of us. Always an excuse, never an admission of wrongdoing. Then it was my homework. I caught her photographing my history essays with her phone, planning to turn in slightly modified versions for her own assignments. When I threatened to tell our parents, she laughed and said, "Go ahead, Dad will just say I was trying to learn from my smart big sister. He'll probably praise me for being so dedicated to my education." She wasn't wrong. That's exactly what Tom did say when I reported the plagiarism attempt. In his eyes, Riley could do no wrong. She was just a little girl trying to keep up with her older stepsister, and wasn't it wonderful that she looked up to me so much? The worst part was watching my mom try to navigate the situation. She could see what Riley was doing, but she also knew that calling it out too aggressively could cause problems in her marriage. Tom was completely blind to his daughter's manipulative behavior, and any criticism of Riley was taken as a personal attack on his parenting. So my mom found herself walking on eggshells, trying to protect me while also keeping the peace with her new husband. She'd have quiet conversations with me about setting boundaries and keeping my important belongings secured, but she couldn't directly confront the root of the problem without risking the stability of our blended family. Riley seemed to sense this dynamic and used it to her advantage. She knew that as long as she kept her father wrapped around her little finger, she could get away with almost anything. And she was incredibly good at playing the loving, innocent daughter when he was around. I'll never forget the night I realized just how calculated Riley really was.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
It was about a year after the credit card incident, and I was going through a rough patch at school. There was this group of popular girls who had decided I was their target for some reason, spreading rumors about me and making snide comments whenever I walked by. It was typical teenage drama, but it was wearing on me emotionally. Riley knew I was struggling because I'd made the mistake of confiding in her during what I thought was a genuine moment of sisterly bonding. She'd listened sympathetically, offering hugs and encouraging words, telling me that those girls were just jealous and that I was better than all of them combined. But the next week, I overheard her on the phone with one of her friends, gossiping about my situation. She was laughing as she described how pathetic I was for being so upset about some stupid high school drama. She said she was getting tired of having to pretend to care about my problems and that she wished I would just get over myself already. The casual cruelty in her voice was like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just typical sibling irritation or jealousy. This was genuine contempt. She didn't see me as her sister at all. I was just an obstacle to overcome, a problem to manage, someone taking up space in what she considered to be her family. That's when I started paying closer attention to how Riley operated. I began to notice patterns in her behavior, the way she could turn on the charm when adults were around and drop it the moment they left the room. She had different personalities for different people, always tailoring her act to get the maximum benefit from each relationship. With Tom, she was the perfect daughter, sweet and innocent and slightly helpless, always needing daddy's protection and guidance. With my mom, she was grateful and affectionate, constantly thanking her for making their family complete and gushing about how much she loved having a mother figure again. With me when we were alone, she was cold and calculating, making it clear that I was an unwelcome intruder in her perfect little world. But it was her performance at school that really opened my eyes to how sophisticated her manipulation had become. Riley was universally loved by her teachers and classmates. She was the girl everyone wanted to be friends with, the one teachers trusted to help with special projects, the one parents pointed to as an example of how their own children should behave. I started volunteering to help with school events that Riley was involved in, just to observe her in action. What I saw was masterful. She had an instinct for reading people and giving them exactly what they wanted. With the shy kids, she was encouraging and inclusive. With the popular ones, she was fun and exciting. With the teachers, she was respectful and eager to learn. But I also noticed the subtle ways she undermined people who threatened her position. A casual comment here, a strategic friendship there, always positioning herself as the victim or the hero of whatever drama was unfolding. She never did anything obviously cruel or mean. She was too smart for that. Instead, she planted seeds and let other people do the dirty work for her. Watching her operate was both fascinating and terrifying. I realized I was living with someone who had absolutely no genuine emotions when it came to interpersonal relationships. Everything was calculated. Everything was strategic. She didn't love our parents or care about her friends, or feel bad about hurting people. She just got better and better at pretending she did. The scariest part was how good she was getting at it. By the time she turned 15, Riley had perfected her act to the point where even I sometimes found myself doubting my own perceptions. When she was being sweet to me in front of our parents, part of me would think maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe she really was trying to be a good sister and I was just too damaged by our early conflicts to see it. But then something would happen to remind me exactly who I was dealing with. Like the time she accidentally invited my ex-boyfriend to her birthday party, knowing full well that we'd had a messy breakup just weeks before. or the way she always seemed to need help with homework, or have some kind of crisis whenever I had plans with friends, forcing me to cancel so I could be there for my struggling little sister. Tom never saw through any of it. If anything, he seemed to think Riley's constant need for attention and support was proof of what a sensitive, caring girl she was. He'd brag to his friends about how sweet and loving his daughter was, how she always put family first, how lucky he was to have raised such a wonderful young woman. It became a running joke in my head, the disconnect between Tom's perception of Riley and the reality of who she actually was. He saw a devoted daughter who occasionally made minor mistakes due to her big heart and generous nature. I saw a master manipulator who had turned deception into an art form. The situation at home became increasingly tense as Riley and I got older. She seemed to sense that I was onto her game, and she responded by escalating her efforts to discredit me in our parents' eyes. Suddenly things would go missing and somehow end up in my room. Plans would get miscommunicated in ways that made me look irresponsible or selfish. Conversations would get twisted and repeated back to our parents in ways that painted me as the problem child. My mom could see what was happening, but she was trapped. Tom refused to believe that his precious Riley could be capable of such calculated cruelty, and any attempt to point out the pattern of behavior was met with accusations that my mom was playing favorites or trying to turn him against his daughter. The stress was taking a toll on my mom's marriage and on my relationship with Tom. He'd gone from being a warm, welcoming stepfather to someone who viewed me with suspicion and disappointment. In his mind, I was the jealous older sister who couldn't handle sharing the spotlight, who was so insecure that I had to make up stories about poor Riley just to make myself feel better. Meanwhile, Riley's public persona continued to shine brighter than ever. She was elected to student council, made the varsity cheerleading team as a sophomore, and had colleges already reaching out to her about academic scholarships. On paper, she was the perfect teenager. Everyone who knew her thought Tom and my mom were incredibly lucky to have such an accomplished, well-behaved daughter. If only they knew what she was really like behind closed doors. The snide comments, the calculated cruelties, the way she'd smile sweetly while twisting the knife just a little bit deeper. She had turned our home into a psychological battlefield, and she was winning every single engagement. But Riley made one crucial mistake in all her scheming. She got cocky. She started to believe her own press, thinking she was so smart and so untouchable that she could get away with anything. She stopped being careful about covering her tracks, stopped worrying about whether someone might catch her in the act. And that's how I finally got the evidence I needed to expose her for who she really was. It started with a phone call that she thought no one else would ever hear. A conversation so revealing, so damning, that even Tom wouldn't be able to explain it away or dismiss it as a misunderstanding. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March, right around Riley's 17th birthday. She was up in her room, supposedly working on college applications, when her phone rang. I was in the hallway outside her door, heading to my own room, when I heard her answer with her usual bright, cheerful tone. But then her voice changed. The sweetness dropped away like a mask being removed, replaced by something cold and calculating that I'd heard before but never quite so clearly. I stopped walking and pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear what she was saying. What I heard in that 10-minute conversation changed everything. It was Riley talking to someone. I couldn't tell who, but the topic was unmistakably clear. She was discussing me, our family, and her long-term plans in a way that was so calculating, so utterly devoid of human warmth, that it made my blood run cold. I knew I had to record it somehow, but by the time I'd gotten my phone out, she was already wrapping up the call. I'd missed most of it, but I'd heard enough to know that this was the smoking gun I'd been waiting for. This was proof of who Riley really was underneath all the charm and manipulation, but I needed more than just my word against hers. I needed concrete evidence that even Tom couldn't dismiss or rationalize away. So I started planning, waiting for another opportunity to catch Riley being her true self when she thought no one was listening. I didn't have to wait long. Riley's confidence had reached the point where she was getting sloppy about when and where she dropped her mask. And when she finally gave me the perfect opportunity to expose her, I was ready. The opportunity came 3 weeks later during what was supposed to be a quiet Sunday evening at home. Riley had been accepted to her top choice college with a full scholarship, and the celebration dinner had turned into an hours-long fest of Tom gushing about his brilliant daughter's achievements. My mom tried to balance the conversation by mentioning my own college acceptance, but Tom barely acknowledged it before steering right back to Riley's accomplishments. I excused myself to go upstairs, claiming I had studying to do, but really I just needed to escape the suffocating atmosphere of endless Riley worship. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard Riley's phone buzzing with what sounded like a video call. Her door was slightly ajar, and I could see her settling into her desk chair with her laptop open. I was about to continue to my room when I heard a familiar voice coming through her speakers. It was Madison, one of Riley's closest friends from her old school before our parents got married. They'd maintained their friendship despite the distance, and Riley often talked to her about things she wouldn't discuss with anyone else. Something in Riley's tone made me pause. It was that same cold, calculating voice I'd heard during the phone call weeks earlier. The mask was off again, and she thought she was completely safe from prying ears. I quickly grabbed my phone and activated the voice recording app, then positioned myself just outside her door where I could hear clearly but remain hidden. What I captured over the next 12 minutes was more damning than anything I could have imagined. Riley started by complaining about the dinner celebration, calling it absolutely nauseating to watch Tom fawn all over me like I'm some kind of genius. She laughed as she described how easy it had been to manipulate her guidance counselor into writing a recommendation letter that painted her as overcoming tremendous hardship after her mother's death. Madison asked about our family dynamics, and that's when Riley really let loose. She described me as Jessica the Pathetic, explaining in detail how she'd been systematically undermining my relationship with Tom since day one. She talked about the credit card theft like it was a hilarious prank, boasting about how she'd managed to turn the situation around so that Tom actually felt sorry for her instead of being angry. But the worst part came when Madison asked Riley what her long-term plans were for dealing with me. Riley's response was so cold, so calculated that it made my hands shake as I held my phone steady to capture every word. She explained that her ultimate goal was to drive a permanent wedge between me and Tom, ideally forcing my mom to choose between her marriage and her daughter. Riley was confident that my mom would choose Tom, especially once I graduated and moved out for college. In Riley's twisted vision of the future, I would become the estranged stepdaughter who only showed up for major holidays, while she remained the beloved centerpiece of the family. She went into disturbing detail about her methods, describing how she'd been carefully documenting every interaction between us, keeping a journal of supposed incidents where I'd been cruel or jealous toward her. She planned to present this fictional narrative to our parents gradually, building a case that I was becoming increasingly unstable and resentful as I got older. Riley even admitted to Madison that she'd been deliberately sabotaging my friendships by spreading subtle rumors and creating drama whenever possible. She'd been the one feeding information to those popular girls who had made my life miserable junior year, providing them with just enough personal details to make their attacks particularly painful. The conversation took an even darker turn when Madison asked if Riley ever felt bad about what she was doing. Riley's laugh was sharp and humorless as she explained that she viewed our entire family dynamic as a strategic game. In her mind there could only be one winner, and she was determined to make sure it was her. She described me as collateral damage in her quest to secure her position as Tom's only real daughter. She talked about my mom with barely concealed contempt, calling her useful but temporary and predicting that Tom would eventually grow tired of playing stepfather to someone else's ungrateful child. The most chilling moment came when Riley started talking about her college plans. She intended to stay relatively close to home, not because she wanted to maintain family connections, but because she wanted to monitor the situation and intervene if necessary to prevent any reconciliation between me and Tom. She'd already been planting seeds about how worried she was about my increasingly erratic behavior, and how concerned she was that I might do something to hurt myself or others out of jealousy. Riley was essentially setting up a narrative where any future attempt I made to expose her manipulation could be dismissed as the desperate lies of an unstable person. Madison seemed uncomfortable with some of what Riley was describing, asking several times if she was sure she wanted to go to such extremes. Riley's response was immediate and unwavering. She'd lost one parent already, she said, and she wasn't about to risk losing another one to some random woman and her damaged daughter. The conversation wrapped up with Riley outlining her immediate plans for the summer before college. She intended to spend as much time as possible bonding with Tom, creating new memories and traditions that didn't include me or my mom. She wanted to establish herself as his primary emotional support system before leaving for school, ensuring that her absence would be felt more acutely than anyone else's presence. As I listened to her casual cruelty, her complete lack of empathy, her calculated manipulation of everyone who cared about her, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or typical teenage drama. This was psychological warfare being waged by someone who saw human relationships as nothing more than strategic advantages to be gained or obstacles to be eliminated. I saved the recording immediately, creating multiple backup copies on different devices and cloud storage accounts. This was my insurance policy, my proof that Riley's sweet innocent facade was nothing more than an elaborate performance designed to manipulate everyone around her, but I knew I had to be smart about how I used this information. Riley had been playing this game for years, and she'd gotten very good at turning any accusation back on the accuser. If I tried to confront her directly or play the recording for our parents without the right setup, she'd find a way to discredit it or explain it away. I needed to wait for the perfect moment, when Riley's guard was completely down and her true nature was on full display in front of witnesses who couldn't be manipulated or fooled. I needed her to expose herself in a way that even Tom couldn't rationalize or dismiss. That moment came sooner than I expected, during what should have been a celebration dinner for my own college acceptance. My mom had insisted on making a big deal out of it, inviting Tom's parents and my Aunt Sarah to join us for a fancy dinner at home. It was supposed to be my night, my chance to feel proud of my own achievements instead of always standing in Riley's shadow, but of course, Riley couldn't let that happen. She'd spent the entire week leading up to the dinner subtly undermining the celebration, making comments about how my college wasn't as prestigious as hers, how my scholarship wasn't as substantial, how it was sweet that everyone was making such a big fuss over something so ordinary. The dinner started pleasantly enough, with everyone congratulating me and asking about my plans for the fall. Tom's parents were genuinely excited for me, and my Aunt Sarah kept gushing about how proud she was. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe this could actually be about me for once, but Riley was just waiting for her moment to strike. It came during dessert, when Tom's mother was telling a story about her own college experience and drawing parallels to what mine might be like. Riley listened with that fake interested expression she'd perfected, nodding and smiling at all the right moments. Then as the conversation naturally shifted to include her own college plans, Riley started her performance. She talked about how excited she was to be going to school, but how worried she was about leaving our family during such a difficult time. When Tom's father asked what she meant, Riley glanced meaningfully at me before launching into her carefully crafted narrative. She talked about how challenging it had been to watch me struggle with the transition to college life, how concerned she was about my emotional state and my ability to handle being away from home. She painted herself as the devoted sister who'd been trying to support me through my difficulties, but who was running out of ways to help. Riley's performance was masterful, full of subtle implications and carefully worded concerns that made it sound like she was trying to protect me while actually painting me as unstable and problematic. She never said anything directly accusatory, but the implication was clear. I was having some kind of breakdown, and she was the only one brave enough to acknowledge it. Tom immediately took the bait, asking Riley to elaborate on what specific behaviors she'd observed. This was exactly what she'd been hoping for, and she launched into a detailed account of supposed incidents that painted me as jealous, erratic, and increasingly resentful of her success. According to Riley's version of events, I'd been making snide comments about her achievements, trying to undermine her relationship with Tom, and generally creating a toxic atmosphere in the house. She claimed I'd been acting out because I couldn't handle the fact that she was more successful than me, and she was worried about what I might do when we were both away at college. The worst part was watching our dinner guests' reactions. Tom's parents, who had always been kind to me, started looking at me with concern and pity. My Aunt Sarah seemed confused and uncomfortable, clearly not sure what to believe. Even my mom looked stunned by the detailed accusations Riley was making. I sat there in stunned silence as Riley systematically destroyed my reputation with surgical precision. Every word was calculated, every pause strategic, every concerned expression perfectly timed. She was dismantling years of relationships and goodwill with the skill of a master manipulator, and there was nothing I could do to stop it without looking exactly as defensive and unstable as she was claiming I was. Tom was eating up every word, nodding gravely and occasionally glancing at me with disappointment and concern. This was exactly the opening he'd been waiting for, confirmation that his suspicions about my jealousy and resentment were justified. In his mind, Riley was finally brave enough to speak the truth about what had been happening in our house. But Riley made one crucial mistake in her eagerness to completely discredit me. She got carried away with her performance, adding details and embellishments that went beyond her usual careful manipulation. She started describing specific incidents that I could easily disprove, making claims about my behavior that were so exaggerated they bordered on absurd. More importantly, she let her mask slip just enough for me to see the satisfaction in her eyes as she watched the adults around the table believing every word of her lies. She was enjoying this too much, reveling in her ability to manipulate the situation so completely. That's when I realized this was my moment. Riley had overplayed her hand, and she was so confident in her performance that she'd stopped being careful about how she looked when she thought people weren't watching her directly. I waited until she finished her latest fabricated anecdote about my supposed jealousy, watching as Tom nodded sympathetically and reached over to pat her hand in support. The room was silent, except for the sound of my Aunt Sarah shifting uncomfortably in her chair and my mom's barely contained breathing. Then Riley made the comment that sealed her fate. She looked directly at me with that smugly satisfied expression she'd perfected over the years and said, "I just want Jessica to know that no matter how mean she is to me, no matter how much she resents our family, Dad loves me more anyway. Nothing she does is going to change that." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Tom looked uncomfortable with how directly cruel the comment was, though he didn't say anything to correct her. Riley's smile was triumphant, like she'd just delivered the killing blow in a fight I hadn't even realized we were having. That's when I pulled out my phone, found the recording I'd made weeks earlier, and set it on the table where everyone could see it. Riley's expression shifted from triumph to confusion as I calmly pressed play, and her own voice filled the dining room with crystal clear audio of everything she'd said to Madison about her manipulation tactics and her complete contempt for our family. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Tom's face went white as he heard his beloved daughter describing him as easy to manipulate and discussing her plans to systematically destroy my relationship with him. Tom's parents looked horrified as Riley's recorded voice laughed about the credit card theft and bragged about spreading rumors to hurt me at school. My Aunt Sarah's mouth fell open when Riley's voice casually discussed driving a wedge between my mom and Tom, treating their marriage as nothing more than a temporary inconvenience to be eliminated. And my mom, my poor mom, just sat there with tears streaming down her face as she listened to the girl she'd tried so hard to love and accept, describe her as useful but temporary. But the most shocking reaction came from Riley herself. Instead of looking ashamed or trying to deny what everyone was hearing, she looked absolutely furious. Not sorry, not embarrassed, just rage that her carefully constructed facade had been torn away in front of everyone who mattered. The recording played for what felt like hours but was actually only 12 minutes. 12 minutes of Riley's true voice, her real thoughts, her actual feelings about every person sitting around that table. When it finally ended, the silence was so complete I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. Tom stared at his daughter like he was seeing her for the first time, his face cycling through confusion, hurt, and dawning realization. Riley stared back at him defiantly, no longer bothering to maintain her innocent act now that the truth was out. The first person to speak was Tom's mother, her voice shaky with shock and disappointment. She asked Riley if what they'd just heard was really how she felt, if she'd really been lying and manipulating everyone for all these years. Riley's response was the final nail in her own coffin. Instead of showing remorse or trying to explain, she doubled down on her cruelty. She told Tom's mother that she was tired of pretending to care about people who weren't really her family, that she was done playing nice with people who would never be as important to her father as she was. She turned to my mom and told her that she'd never wanted a stepmother, that she'd been planning from day one to make sure their marriage didn't last. She looked at me with pure hatred and said she was glad I finally knew exactly how she felt about me, that she was tired of pretending we were sisters when she'd never seen me as anything more than an obstacle to overcome. But it was what she said to Tom that finally broke through his denial completely. She told him that she was disappointed in him for being so easily manipulated, that she'd expected him to be smarter than to fall for such obvious lies and manipulation. She called him weak for needing other people's approval so desperately that he'd believe anything anyone told him. The look on Tom's face was heartbreaking. This was his little girl, the daughter he'd raised and protected and adored, telling him that she'd been manipulating him for years and thought he was pathetic for falling for it. Everything he'd believed about his relationship with Riley, everything he'd thought he knew about his own family, was crumbling in real time. Riley wasn't finished. She seemed determined to burn every bridge and destroy every relationship in the most spectacular way possible. She told the entire table that she'd been documenting everyone's weaknesses and flaws for years, that she had enough information to destroy any of them if they tried to turn Tom against her. She claimed she had evidence of my mom's real feelings about Tom's financial situation, recordings of conversations where my mom supposedly complained about supporting Tom's spending habits. She said she had photos and messages that would prove I'd been bullying her for years, that she could make me look like the unstable, jealous stepsister she'd always claimed I was. The threats were clearly desperate attempts to regain control of the situation, but they only made everything worse. Tom looked absolutely disgusted as he realized that his daughter had been spying on and plotting against everyone in their family. The image of Riley as his innocent, loving daughter was completely shattered, replaced by the reality of someone who viewed human relationships as warfare. Tom's parents quietly excused themselves, clearly too shocked and uncomfortable to remain at the table. My Aunt Sarah followed shortly after, pausing only to hug my mom and whisper something about calling her later. Within minutes, what had started as a celebration dinner had become a family crisis of epic proportions. The four of us sat in tense silence after the guests left, Riley still glaring defiantly while Tom struggled to process what he'd learned about his daughter. My mom reached over to squeeze my hand, her eyes red from crying, but her expression relieved that the truth was finally out. Tom finally found his voice, asking Riley if anything she'd ever said to him had been genuine, if she'd ever actually loved him, or if it had all been an act designed to get what she wanted. Riley's answer was swift and brutal. She told him that love was for weak people, that she'd learned early on that manipulation was more effective than genuine emotion. She said she'd been protecting herself the only way she knew how, by making sure she was always the most important person in his life. She claimed that if he'd been a better father, if he'd made her feel more secure, she wouldn't have needed to resort to such tactics. Even in her moment of complete exposure, Riley was trying to shift blame and make herself the victim. She was incapable of taking responsibility for her actions or showing genuine remorse for the pain she'd caused. Everything was someone else's fault, everyone else's failure, everyone else's weakness. That's when Tom said the words that changed everything, the response that Riley clearly hadn't expected despite all her planning and manipulation. He told her that he was ashamed of what she'd become, that he didn't recognize the person sitting across from him as his daughter. Riley's confident facade finally cracked. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely shocked and afraid. This wasn't part of her plan. Tom was supposed to forgive her, to understand that everything she'd done was out of love and insecurity. He wasn't supposed to reject her completely. Riley's shock quickly transformed into something far more dangerous. The confident manipulator was gone, replaced by someone desperate and cornered. She started screaming at Tom, calling him ungrateful and stupid, telling him he'd regret choosing them over his real daughter. Her voice cracked as she accused him of never really loving her, of always looking for an excuse to replace her with a better family.
The irony was staggering. After years of coldly calculating every move, Riley was finally showing genuine emotion, and it was pure, unfiltered rage. She swept her arm across the table, sending dishes crashing to the floor, and stood up so violently that her chair toppled backward. Tom just sat there, staring at the wreckage of his daughter's tantrum with an expression of profound sadness. When Riley demanded that he say something, anything, he simply shook his head and told her he needed time to think. That response sent Riley into an even deeper spiral of fury. She turned her venom toward my mom, screaming that this was all her fault for poisoning Tom against his own daughter. According to Riley's twisted logic, my mom had been plotting from day one to destroy their father-daughter relationship so she could have Tom all to herself. She accused my mom of using me as a weapon, of deliberately turning Tom against Riley out of jealousy. My mom tried to respond calmly, explaining that she'd always tried to support Riley and include her in our family, but Riley wasn't interested in hearing anything that contradicted her narrative. She'd spent so many years viewing every interaction through the lens of strategic advantage that she couldn't comprehend the possibility of genuine care or concern. The final explosion came when Riley realized that her college plans were now in jeopardy. She'd been counting on Tom's continued financial and emotional support, assuming that no matter what happened, he'd always prioritize her needs above everyone else's. The possibility that her behavior might have actual consequences had never seriously occurred to her. She demanded to know if Tom was planning to cut off her college funding, and when he didn't immediately reassure her, she completely lost control. She started throwing everything within reach, screaming about how unfair it was that one stupid recording could ruin everything she'd worked for. She called me every name in the book, blaming me for destroying her life out of petty jealousy. But the most revealing moment came when she started pleading with Tom, trying one last desperate manipulation. She claimed that everything on the recording had been taken out of context, that she'd been venting to a friend and exaggerating her feelings because she was stressed about college. She insisted that deep down, she really did love our family, and she was just scared of losing Tom's affection when she left for school. It was fascinating to watch her try to rebuild her facade in real time, reaching for the same manipulation tactics that had worked for years. But something fundamental had shifted in Tom's perception of her. He'd heard her real voice, her genuine thoughts, and there was no going back to the comfortable illusion he'd maintained for so long. When Tom finally spoke again, his voice was quiet but firm. He told Riley that he needed her to leave the house for the night, to go stay with a friend or family member while he processed everything that had happened. Riley's response was immediate and vicious, telling him that if she left, she'd never come back, that he was choosing strangers over his own blood. Tom's response surprised everyone, including me. He told Riley that maybe some time apart would be good for both of them, that they both needed space to figure out how to move forward. It wasn't the immediate forgiveness Riley expected, but it also wasn't the complete rejection she feared. It was something more complex and painful, disappointed love from a father who was finally seeing his daughter clearly. Riley packed a bag with dramatic flair, slamming drawers and muttering threats under her breath. She called several friends before finding someone willing to let her stay over, painting herself as the victim of a cruel family conspiracy. Even in her defeat, she was already working on her next manipulation, crafting a narrative that would garner sympathy and support from anyone willing to listen. Before she left, Riley made one final attempt to regain control of the situation. She stood in the doorway and delivered what she clearly thought would be a devastating final blow, telling Tom that when he came to his senses and realized what he'd lost, it would be too late. She'd be gone, successful and happy, and he'd be stuck with a wife and stepdaughter who would never love him the way she had. The manipulation was so transparent, so obviously calculated, that it actually helped Tom see the truth more clearly. This wasn't grief or hurt talking, it was strategic emotional blackmail from someone who viewed his love as a commodity to be withheld or granted based on his compliance with her demands. After Riley left, the house felt different. The oppressive tension that had characterized our family dynamic for years was gone, replaced by a strange kind of peace mixed with sadness. Tom sat at the kitchen table for hours, not speaking, just processing the collapse of everything he'd believed about his relationship with his daughter. My mom and I cleaned up the broken dishes and overturned furniture in silence, both of us afraid to say anything that might make the situation worse. Tom was clearly devastated, and we didn't want to add to his pain by celebrating Riley's exposure, even though her departure felt like a massive weight being lifted from our shoulders. Over the next few days, Tom went through what could only be described as a grieving process. He'd lost the daughter he thought he knew, and he was struggling to reconcile the loving, innocent girl he'd raised with the calculating manipulator who'd been revealed. He spent hours looking through old photos and videos, trying to identify moments when Riley's mask had slipped that he'd missed at the time. Meanwhile, Riley was busy trying to control the narrative from wherever she was staying. She called Tom constantly, alternating between tearful apologies and angry accusations. She sent long text messages explaining that she'd only said those things because she was afraid of losing him, that everything she'd done had been motivated by love and insecurity. But Tom was finally listening with clear ears, and he could hear the manipulation in every word. Riley's apologies always came with conditions and justifications. Her explanations always painted her as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. Even when she was supposedly taking responsibility for her actions, she was actually shifting blame to everyone else. The calls from Riley's school guidance counselor were particularly eye-opening. It turned out that many of the hardships Riley had described in her college applications were either exaggerated or completely fabricated. The counselor had written recommendation letters based on stories Riley had told about family dysfunction and financial struggles that bore little resemblance to reality. Tom realized that Riley had been manipulating her school relationships just as systematically as she'd manipulated her family relationships. Teachers who thought they were helping a struggling student overcome personal trauma had actually been enabling someone who viewed their sympathy as a tool for personal advancement. The college scholarship situation became complicated quickly. When some of Riley's fabricated hardship stories came to light, the admissions office started asking questions about the accuracy of her application materials. Tom found himself in the bizarre position of having to decide whether to protect Riley's college prospects by backing up her lies or to tell the truth about their family situation. He chose honesty, explaining to the admissions counselor that Riley had exaggerated their family's difficulties and that many of the personal struggles she described in her essays weren't accurate. The consequences were swift and severe. Riley's full scholarship was revoked, and her admission was placed under review pending a complete investigation of her application materials. When Riley learned about Tom's conversation with the college, her reaction was explosive. She accused him of deliberately sabotaging her future out of spite, of punishing her for being honest about her feelings. She couldn't understand why Tom would choose the truth over protecting her opportunities, viewing his honesty as the ultimate betrayal. That phone call was the final straw for Tom. Riley's complete inability to understand why lying on college applications was wrong, her assumption that he should prioritize her success over basic honesty, made him realize that the problem went much deeper than teenage manipulation or insecurity. This was a fundamental lack of moral understanding that couldn't be fixed with therapy or time. Tom made the difficult decision to stop taking Riley's calls and responding to her messages. He told her through her friend's parents that he needed an extended break from their relationship, that he couldn't continue enabling her destructive behavior by pretending it was normal or acceptable. Riley's response was to launch a full-scale campaign to turn everyone against Tom and our family. She contacted relatives, family friends, and neighbors, telling elaborate stories about emotional abuse and neglect. According to her version of events, Tom had kicked her out for defending herself against my bullying, and my mom and I had manipulated him into choosing us over his own daughter. Some people believed her initially, calling Tom to express concern about the situation. But Riley made the same mistake she'd always made. She couldn't resist embellishing her stories, adding dramatic details that didn't quite add up. When people started asking specific questions or requesting clarification, her narrative began to fall apart. More importantly, several family members remembered their own uncomfortable interactions with Riley over the years. Incidents that had seemed like isolated problems suddenly fit into a larger pattern of manipulation and deception. People started sharing their own stories about times when Riley had lied to them or used them for personal gain. The recording I'd made became crucial evidence in defending our family against Riley's smear campaign. When relatives called to confront Tom about supposedly mistreating Riley, he played them portions of the recording that directly contradicted her claims. Hearing Riley's own voice describing her manipulation tactics and expressing contempt for our family made it impossible for anyone to maintain their sympathy for her. Riley's friend Madison became an unexpected ally in revealing the truth. Apparently, she'd been uncomfortable with Riley's behavior for months but hadn't known how to address it. When she learned that the conversation she'd had with Riley had been recorded and shared, she was initially angry, but then relieved that someone else had finally witnessed what she'd been seeing. Madison contacted Tom directly to apologize for not speaking up sooner and to provide additional context about Riley's behavior at school. She revealed that Riley had been systematically manipulating classmates and teachers for years, creating drama and conflict whenever it served her purposes. Many of the academic and social successes that Riley had claimed were built on lies and manipulation rather than genuine achievement. The picture that emerged was of someone who had been living a completely fabricated life, presenting different versions of herself to different people, based on what would gain her the most advantage. Her relationship with our family was just one of many strategic deceptions she'd been maintaining simultaneously. Tom's decision to maintain his distance from Riley was validated when she made one final desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. She showed up at our house unannounced, claiming she'd learned her lesson and was ready to be honest about her mistakes. But even her apology was manipulative, full of calculated emotional appeals and subtle blame shifting. When Tom refused to immediately welcome her back, Riley's mask slipped one final time. She told him that she'd been planning to forgive him for his mistakes and give him another chance to be a proper father, but that his continued rejection proved he'd never really loved her at all. Even in her supposed moment of remorse, she was positioning herself as the generous party offering forgiveness, rather than the person who needed to earn it. That conversation made Tom realize that Riley was fundamentally incapable of genuine change or growth. Her apologies were just another form of manipulation, her promises just another way to regain strategic advantage. There was no real recognition of wrongdoing, no authentic remorse, no understanding of how her behavior had affected other people. The final chapter of Riley's presence in our lives came when she turned 18 and legally became an adult. She'd been staying with various friends and distant relatives, burning through relationships as people realized what she was really like. Her college prospects had completely evaporated, and she was facing the reality of having to support herself without the financial and emotional safety net she'd always taken for granted. Instead of using this as an opportunity for genuine self-reflection and change, Riley doubled down on her victim narrative. She started a social media campaign painting herself as a teenager, abandoned by her family for speaking the truth about abuse and neglect. She created elaborate posts describing fictional incidents of mistreatment, garnering sympathy and financial support from strangers who believed her stories. But Riley's inability to maintain consistent lies eventually caught up with her. People who knew our family started commenting on her posts, sharing their own experiences that contradicted her claims. The recording I'd made began circulating more widely, providing concrete evidence that Riley's victim narrative was completely fabricated. The social media campaign backfired spectacularly when several of Riley's former friends started sharing their own stories about her manipulative behavior. A picture emerged of someone who had been systematically deceiving and using people for years, treating every relationship as an opportunity for personal gain, rather than genuine human connection. Tom made the final decision to completely cut ties with Riley when she threatened to make false abuse allegations against him if he didn't resume financial support. The threat revealed that even after everything that had happened, Riley still viewed their relationship purely in terms of what she could extract from it. There was no love, no genuine desire for reconciliation, just continued manipulation and emotional blackmail. The peace that settled over our house after Riley's final departure was profound. For the first time in years, we could have conversations without wondering who was listening or how our words might be twisted. We could make plans without worrying about sabotage or manipulation. We could simply be a family without constantly walking on eggshells. Tom struggled with guilt and regret for months, questioning whether he could have handled things differently or recognized Riley's true nature sooner. But gradually, he began to understand that he'd been the victim of sophisticated manipulation by someone who had been perfecting her techniques since childhood. There was no shame in having been deceived by someone who had made deception their life's work. The experience changed all of us, but perhaps Tom most of all. He became more cautious about trusting people at face value, more attentive to the difference between words and actions, more aware of how easily good intentions could be exploited by someone with malicious goals. As for me, I finally felt free to be myself without constantly defending against subtle attacks and manipulation. The recording that had exposed Riley's true nature became a reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply tell the truth, even when it's difficult and painful for everyone involved.
Riley disappeared from our lives completely after that, moving to another state and cutting all contact with everyone who knew about her past behavior. Occasionally, we'd hear secondhand reports about her continued struggles with relationships and employment, but we learned to view these updates with detached sadness rather than any desire to intervene or help. The lesson we all learned was that family isn't defined by blood relations or legal arrangements but by genuine care, respect, and honesty. Riley had never been family in any meaningful sense,
She'd been a master manipulator who happened to share our living space. Her departure didn't break up our family. It finally allowed our real family to heal and grow stronger. 3 years have passed since that dinner, and I can honestly say our family has never been stronger. Tom and my mom renewed their wedding vows last spring in a small ceremony that felt more authentic than their original wedding, which had been overshadowed by Riley's performance as the perfect stepdaughter. This time there were no hidden agendas, no one calculating how to use the moment for personal gain. Tom has become the father figure I never knew I needed. Without Riley's constant manipulation driving a wedge between us, we discovered we actually have a lot in common. He helped me move into my college dorm, and we text regularly about everything from my classes to random funny videos we find online. The relationship feels natural and easy in a way it never could when every interaction was being monitored and potentially weaponized. My mom finally relaxed in her own home. For years she'd been walking on eggshells, trying to balance being supportive of me while not threatening Riley's position with Tom. She'd lost weight from the stress, developed insomnia, and had been seeing a therapist to cope with the constant tension. Now she sleeps peacefully, laughs freely, and has rediscovered her joy in simple family moments. The house itself feels different too. We can leave belongings out without worrying about them being stolen or destroyed. We can have conversations without wondering who's listening or how our words might be twisted later. We can make plans without anticipating sabotage. It's amazing how much energy we'd all been spending on defensive measures without even realizing it. College has been incredible for me. Without the constant stress of dealing with Riley's manipulation, my grades improved dramatically. I made genuine friendships based on shared interests rather than strategic alliances. I joined clubs, volunteered for causes I care about, and discovered parts of myself that had been suppressed for years while I was focused on simple survival at home. The most surprising development was meeting David, a psychology major who became fascinated by my story when I shared it during a class discussion about family dynamics. He helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't normal sibling rivalry but psychological abuse. Learning the clinical terms for Riley's behavior patterns was both validating and healing. David explained that people like Riley often have what psychologists call antisocial personality traits, characterized by a lack of empathy, manipulative behavior, and an inability to form genuine emotional attachments. Understanding that Riley's behavior stemmed from a fundamental psychological difference rather than something I'd done wrong was liberating. Through David, I learned about concepts like gaslighting, triangulation, and scapegoating that described exactly what Riley had been doing to our family for years. Having vocabulary for these experiences helped me process the trauma and recognize that I'd been remarkably resilient in surviving such systematic psychological manipulation. Tom started going to therapy too, working through his guilt about having been deceived by Riley for so long. His therapist helped him understand that intelligent, caring people are often the most vulnerable to manipulation because they assume others share their basic moral framework. Riley had exploited his love and trust, not because he was weak or stupid, but because he was genuinely caring. The therapy also helped Tom recognize warning signs he'd missed with Riley that could protect him in future relationships. He learned about love bombing, the cycle of manipulation and apology, and how predatory people identify and exploit their targets' emotional needs. It was painful education but necessary for his healing. We occasionally heard updates about Riley through mutual acquaintances, and the pattern was always the same. She'd move to a new place, charm new people with her sob story about being abandoned by her family, and gradually reveal her true nature as relationships deepened. She'd burned through jobs, roommates, and romantic relationships with predictable regularity. One particularly telling incident occurred when Riley tried to reconnect with her maternal grandmother, her mom's mother who lived across the country. Riley painted herself as a young woman who'd been unfairly estranged from her father and was seeking connection with her mother's side of the family. The grandmother, who remembered Riley as a sweet child, welcomed her with open arms. For a few months, Riley seemed to have found a stable situation. She got a job at a local restaurant, rented a small apartment, and appeared to be building a normal life. Her social media posts showed her looking happy and settled, surrounded by new friends and seemingly thriving in her independence. But the facade couldn't last. Riley's co-workers started noticing money missing from the register during her shifts.
Her roommate discovered Riley going through her personal belongings and using her credit cards for online purchases. Friends began comparing notes about inconsistencies in Riley's stories about her past and her family situation. The final straw came when Riley's grandmother found out that Riley had been telling people the elderly woman was suffering from dementia and needed full-time care. Riley had been positioning herself as the devoted granddaughter, making sacrifices to care for her ailing relative, while simultaneously applying for financial assistance programs designed for caregivers of disabled family members. When the grandmother confronted Riley about the lies, Riley's response was chilling. She told her grandmother that she was just trying to secure her inheritance early, that the old woman was going to die soon anyway, and that Riley deserved compensation for dealing with such a burden. The mask had slipped again, revealing the same cold calculation we'd witnessed years earlier. Riley's grandmother immediately cut all contact and warned other family members about Riley's behavior. Word spread quickly through their extended family network, and Riley found herself persona non grata with yet another group of people who'd initially tried to help her. The pattern was so consistent it was almost predictable. Riley would identify vulnerable, caring people and exploit their kindness until they discovered her true nature. Then she'd move on to the next group of potential victims, always positioning herself as the wronged party seeking a fresh start. What struck me most about these reports was how little Riley seemed to learn from her repeated failures. Each time her manipulation was exposed, she blamed external circumstances rather than examining her own behavior. She never seemed to consider that perhaps treating people with genuine respect and kindness might yield better long-term results than constant deception. David's psychology training helped him explain this pattern too. People with antisocial traits often can't learn from consequences in the same way others do because they don't experience genuine remorse or empathy. To Riley, each exposure wasn't a moral failing but simply a tactical error that could be corrected with better manipulation techniques next time. Meanwhile, our family continued to heal and grow stronger. Tom and my mom started traveling together, something they'd never been able to do when Riley was around because she'd always manufacture some crisis that required immediate attention. They took cooking classes, went to concerts, and rediscovered the romance that had brought them together in the first place. I graduated college with honors and started a career in social work, partly inspired by my own experiences with family dysfunction. Working with other families dealing with manipulation and abuse has been both challenging and rewarding. I've been able to help several teenage clients recognize and respond to psychological manipulation, sharing strategies that I developed through my own survival. The recording that had exposed Riley's true nature became something of a teaching tool in my work. With proper anonymization, I've been able to share excerpts with colleagues and clients to demonstrate how sophisticated manipulation can sound perfectly reasonable when presented skillfully. It's helped other people recognize similar patterns in their own relationships. Tom surprised everyone by becoming an advocate for step-family resources and education. He started volunteering with a local organization that helps blended families navigate the complex dynamics of bringing children from different backgrounds together. His experience with Riley, while painful, gave him unique insights into the warning signs of serious problems. Through his volunteer work, Tom met other parents who dealt with similar situations. Hearing their stories helped him realize that manipulation and deception within families is more common than most people want to acknowledge. Many families suffer in silence because they're ashamed to admit that someone they love is systematically hurting them. One of the most meaningful developments was Tom's relationship with his own parents, who had been horrified by their behavior at that dinner. They'd initially been taken in by Riley's performance, but hearing the recording had opened their eyes to how completely they'd been deceived. They reached out to apologize and have since become some of my strongest supporters. Tom's father in particular has become a kind of grandfather figure to me in a way that feels natural and genuine. He often says that losing Riley as a granddaughter was painful, but gaining me as a genuine family member has been a blessing he never expected. These relationships feel solid and authentic in a way that our interactions with Riley never did. The most profound change has been in my own confidence and self-trust. For years, Riley's gaslighting had made me question my own perceptions and reactions. I'd learned to second-guess myself constantly, wondering if I was being too sensitive or reading malice into innocent actions.
Recovery from that kind of psychological conditioning takes time and conscious effort. Learning to trust my instincts again has been liberating. I can now recognize manipulation attempts immediately and respond appropriately rather than getting drawn into elaborate defensive explanations. When someone tries to twist my words or create artificial drama, I simply disengage rather than trying to prove my innocence. This skill has served me well in both personal and professional relationships. I've been able to identify and avoid toxic people early in relationships, protecting myself from the kind of long-term psychological damage that Riley inflicted. I've also been able to help friends and colleagues recognize when they're being manipulated. The recording that started everything remains saved in multiple secure locations, not because I expect to need it again, but because it represents something important about the power of truth. For years, Riley's manipulation had thrived in the shadows, protected by people's reluctance to believe that someone so young and charming could be so calculating. But truth has a way of surfacing eventually, especially when people are brave enough to document and share it. That recording didn't just expose Riley's lies, it validated my experiences and gave our family permission to prioritize their own well-being over maintaining a comfortable fiction. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I'd never captured that conversation, if Riley had continued manipulating our family indefinitely. Would Tom have eventually seen through her deceptions on his own? Would my mom have sacrificed her happiness to keep the peace? Would I have survived years of psychological warfare without developing serious mental health issues? I'll never know the answers to those questions, but I'm grateful I don't have to find out. The truth, however painful initially, set all of us free to build authentic relationships based on genuine care and respect rather than fear and manipulation. The experience taught me that family isn't about blood relations or legal obligations, it's about people who genuinely care about each other's well-being and happiness. Riley may have shared Tom's DNA, but she was never truly family in any meaningful sense. She was a predator who happened to live in our house. Real family means having people in your life who celebrate your successes without jealousy, support you through difficulties without keeping score, and love you for who you are rather than what you can provide them. That's what we have now, and it's worth more than any relationship built on lies and manipulation. Today, when people ask me about dealing with toxic family members, I tell them that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is establish firm boundaries, even if that means cutting contact completely. You can't fix someone who doesn't want to change, and you shouldn't sacrifice your own well-being trying to maintain relationships with people who view you as expendable. Looking back, that dinner table confrontation feels like a lifetime ago. The scared, defensive teenager who played that recording has grown into a confident young woman who trusts her instincts and refuses to accept treatment that diminishes her worth. The family that emerged from Riley's destruction is stronger, happier, and more authentic than what we had before. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a family is losing the member who was slowly poisoning everyone else. Riley's departure didn't break us apart, it finally allowed us to heal and discover what genuine love and support actually feel like. And for that unexpected gift, despite all the pain it took to get here, I'll always be grateful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.